And then I think we're good. Just a quick housekeeping thing. For some reason, our registration link might have logged some of you in as Chris Sean. If you are not, in fact, Chris Sean, please go ahead and change your name. We're sorry about that. Not sure what happened, but just change your name so we know who you are. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. To Kashan and all the other Kashans out there, it's very nice to have you here on a Monday morning. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I've got a 25-year career in learning and talent management. I've got specific expertise in corporate education and a lot of expertise in work-based learning. I'm currently the Chief Learning Officer at Fair Trade Outsourcing. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about that shortly. I actually started my career as a high school teacher in inner city Oakland. I taught economics and government to 12th graders at Skyline High School in Oakland, California. Eventually, after about a decade of that, I found that the most interesting things going on in education actually were going on in the corporate sector. And I left public education and ran a bunch of training functions for Oracle. I eventually moved to Visa, where I ran client training programs for Visa. And then about 15 years ago, I moved to the Midwest, and I was the Chief Learning Officer at Discover Financial Services. Things actually went pretty well there. I was profiled in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and Fortune and CNN Money. And I kind of decided that it was about the right time for me to leave. I started my own consulting firm about 3 years ago. Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce is one of my clients, as is Guild Education, JFF, Kaplan Education, Prologis, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a bunch of other clients there. But a lot of the work I do is around trying to increase access to educational resources for marginalized communities. And these are all just great partners. I've been very blessed to have them. Actually, last month, I started a new job. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at a dual purpose company called Fair Trade Outsourcing. It's a company that tries to make outsourcing work for foreign workers. It's notoriously bad for foreign workers usually, and so it's an interesting philanthropic endeavor that I'm involved in. The agenda for today, we're going to talk about what is work-based learning and what it can do for you. We're going to talk about types of work-based learning programs, and we're going to really focus on the things that you can do to set yourself up for success. And that's really around defining your objectives, choosing the right type of program, and we'll answer. We have question answers at the end. We also have plenty of time for questions as we go through, and so Aaron is taking questions by chat. And so if you have any questions as I'm going, just put them in the chat to Aaron, and then I'll periodically break and ask, and Aaron can read us questions. I think we should have plenty of time. But let's start out with just a quick definition of work-based learning. So work-based learning is an educational strategy that provides students with real-life work experiences where they can apply academic and technical skills to develop their employability and job performance. Okay, so this is work-based learning. And I think, probably the last 30 or 40 years, we've seen an explosion of work-based learning programs up until about 2 years ago. And unfortunately, the pandemic has really limited access to work-based learning programs. I'm going to give you a quote from a McKinsey & Company study from March 2020. They conclude that roughly 1/2 of in-person work-based learning programs through June 20th, 2020 or June 30th, 2020 have been postponed or canceled in North America. And this is really, very, very sad because this has actually had an aggravated existing inequality, especially for young workers that benefit disproportionately from work-based learning programs. And so studies have shown that younger, less affluent workers need work-based learners because they have fewer work-based experiences that provide hands-on learning and exposure to new environments and expectations. Younger workers also have less social capital that provides information and context regarding employment. So oftentimes younger workers they don't have the right context. They don't know how to go about getting employment. The last is the younger workers tend to have less opportunity to build relationships with adults that support their growth and development. And so these are all the reasons why work-based learning is so valuable, especially for young workers. And I'd say that it's more imperative than ever to build and deploy really effective work-based learning programs, especially for these communities of students that really have very few resources around employability. Now, work-based learning initiatives typically start with a mandate to build an internship program or a mentorship program or a job shadow program or a career fair. In the corporate sector, one thing that I've noticed is that usually people start when it comes to learning, they start with the outcome and they say, hey, let's just do this. And unfortunately, if this is where you start, if you've already defined that an internship is right for you, even before you've done very much research, even before you've sort of started thinking about what the objectives, like what are the objectives that the company is trying to solve, there's really a high probability that you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. And I'll explain why in a bit, but you're going to be in a much better situation if you can start by clearly defining objectives. Now, fortunately, there are a variety of objectives for solid work-based learning programs. And typically the way we think about this is we divide sort of non-employees and sort of new hires, people that are just joining the companies, from existing employees or employees transitioning to new job roles. So we think about these populations very separately. And if you're thinking about non-employees or perhaps people that you've just hired but haven't started yet, some of the things that you can accomplish, you can develop a much more robust talent pipeline through work-based learning. And this is if you're looking for a situation in which you have more people applying to jobs, work-based learning actually can do that for you. Work-based learning can improve the speed to proficiency of new employees. So if you're hiring unskilled people or people without any job experience into roles in your company, oftentimes their speed to proficiency is very low because they don't have a lot of the pre-employment skills. And so to the work-based learning can actually improve the speed to proficiency of these audiences. You can increase retention rates of new employees. Oftentimes you see the highest attrition among new employees. And if that's a concern, work-based learning can solve that. And then finally, oftentimes companies have strained relations with the community in which they operate. And so oftentimes if work-based learner can actually foster improved community relations. Now, when you think about existing employees, incumbent employees, employees that are maybe transitioning to new job roles, the work-based learning can reduce the need to staff external applicants in promotional job opportunities. I actually have had a number of clients who've come to me and said, you know, we just hire outside for too many jobs. Can we actually create an internal talent pool where we promote more from within? So that's something work-based learning can do. You can improve speed to proficiency of transitioning employees. So employees going from one job role to another job role, especially if there's a big jump in skill level. So oftentimes companies will start with the early jobs that people come and join and do at the company right when they've been hired are pretty simple, but the steps into future jobs, into the next succession of jobs, are very, very high. And so oftentimes their speed to proficiency really suffers when you promote internal employees. And so work-based learning can help improve that speed to proficiency. The last is that work-based learning can improve employee engagement for specific those incumbent workers that you have. Now, work-based learning, I typically think of this when I think of work-based learning is categorizing work-based learning into 4 different types of programs. And this is actually relies on Jobs for the Future, or JFF. This is their model, and I find it extremely powerful. So to start with, there are work-based learning programs that actually provide career experience. And you can think of this as the type of programs that are good at developing job-specific skills. So apprenticeships are great for this. Lockheed has a whole bunch of apprenticeships, and it's really designed around very specific trades jobs that they have. On-the-job training is another great example of a work-based learning program that can deliver job-specific skills. In addition, job rotations. Oftentimes, there are a lot of jobs that are similar in nature, and you can actually rotate people through those jobs, and that develops very specific job skills. There are two other programs, career exposure programs and career engagement programs, are really good at growing career interest and fostering basic employability skills. So before people have actually even come to work for you. So the career exposure programs, two examples would be job shadows, where you have someone follow someone around for a day and see what the job is like, or mentoring oftentimes creates career exposure, where you have a good mentor who can talk to you about the things that are required for various job roles in the company. Career engagement programs, two examples of those are internships and pre-internships. And these are really good for growing career interest. Oftentimes when you have an internship, a lot of what they're trying to do is just learn how the company works and learn if they have an interest in it. Now, the fourth type of work-based learning, career exploration programs. And so these are really good at helping build career awareness. So this is for people who don't even know if this is sort of an industry they want to get into. So career fairs, industry projects, mock interviews, these are all things that that companies do to build career awareness. And when you think of who the audiences are for this, the way I think about these audiences is for career experience programs, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations. It's really hard to do that with non-employees. That's really designed for employees. So existing, maybe pre-hire employees that you've sort of hired but they haven't started yet. Maybe you want to get them started in an apprenticeship or some sort of, you want to have them rotate through various jobs and see what the company does. But this is mostly for existing workers in your company. Career exploration programs, by way of contrast, are usually for potential or future employees, or they're for people who don't even know very much about your industry, much less your company. And so career exposure programs and those in the middle, career engagement programs, those are really good for a combination. You could actually do that with existing employees, pre-hire employees, potential and future employees. They can work out depending on how you design them. So we're going to take a quick stop here. Aaron, do we have any questions? Questions, Aaron?
No major questions.
Okay.
I want to make sure we let the group know that a copy of all the slides, in addition to a copy of the recording, will be available to all the attendees after today.
Oh, fabulous. We've got an answer, not a question. So if the question were, will I get a copy of the slides? The answer is yes. Okay. So understanding what kind of programs and what they can achieve really sets you up for what I would argue is the most important thing you can do if you're interested in work-based learning. And that is clearly defining your objectives, because this is going to help you invest in the right program. And so a way to think about this is, I'm just giving you an example. If your goal is fostering improved community relations, that's something that can be done with some of the programs and not with others. Typically, career engagement programs and career exploration programs are really good for helping foster improved community relations. Where by contrast, if your goal is to reduce the need to staff external applicants and promotional job opportunities, that's really actually good. The tools that are great for this are career experience programs and career exposure programs. And so the reason why I give you these examples is just to give you a sense of, oftentimes when you start with someone says we want an internship program, they have very different objectives. And oftentimes that's when you start disappointing your internal stakeholders, because everyone can agree that we want a mentorship program, but they disagree as to what they're trying to achieve. And when it comes to report out and sort of say, here are our goals and here's our outcomes, and this is why the program is a success, you'll actually get a fair amount of disagreement over whether or not your program is successful. So starting out, it's super important to get everyone on the same page with regard to what your objectives are. And that's why I say that identifying and prioritizing objectives should be really your first order of business. And this is oftentimes, I've been as head of learning for a long time at a lot of different companies. This is oftentimes really time consuming and painful for your stakeholders, because they know they want an internship program. Maybe they read about it, but they're much less precise about what objectives they want to achieve. So oftentimes when you're working with stakeholders, getting them to back up and articulate what their objectives are is really important. And to the extent that you have a lot of stakeholders, you have to do that across all your stakeholders. And so the first key steps, the first is you have to engage with your stakeholders. Who are your main stakeholders? Figure out who they are. ask them to rank their objectives. And, their first objective is going to be, I want an internship program. Well, what are you trying to achieve with that internship program? Why an internship program now? So these are the kind of questions that can help them articulate their objectives. Once you've done that, see if you can make the trade-offs clear, that no one work-based learning program is going to deliver everything that they need, and confirm your priorities. And so these 4 steps: engage with stakeholders, having them rank their objectives, making the trade-offs clear, and confirming your priorities is critical. And one of a couple tools that I've used, I have actually used a spreadsheet where basically what I do is I define what the objectives are, all the objectives that I hear from people, and I have, those are the rows, and the columns will be my stakeholders, and I basically get them to rank. And then you can actually numerically come out and see what is the highest priority objective that people are trying to achieve. This really helps you when you can sit down with all your stakeholders and say, look, the 3 objectives that have the most that are have the highest collective priority are these 3 objectives, and we're going to be able to achieve 2 of them. And that sort of clarity and transparency really helps you commit to your work-based learning program. The other thing that I've done a trade-off matrix where I try to show visually how these different work-based learning programs are good for different things. And so, I take all those objectives and I line them up, and then I put the different different work-based learning programs as columns and just rank them just green, yellow, red. And so you can see, if you look at the far left-hand column, career fairs. Career fairs may be great at objectives number 1, 7, and 8, but not so good for 2, 3, 4, and 5, and really not good for objective 6. So this is just a way to visually represent that, here are the kinds of trade-offs you're going to make. Another set of tools that I've oftentimes used to choose the right work-based learning program, and usually this is a process that you do with a whole bunch of stakeholders. So if you can sit down with your stakeholders all in one room and start showing them trade-offs, what I've done before is just an effort impact grid. And so basically you rate the effort as low to high over on the y-axis, and on the x-axis you list the impact from low to high. And you can see that in this particular rendering, whatever the objective 1 was, you had mentoring was a high effort activity but a low impact activity, where career fairs could be a low effort but high impact. So ultimately you sort of want to skew towards the things in the bottom right hand corner: low effort, high impact. Here's another example. In this one, when you do a 2x2 matrix, you can see that that job rotations have medium effort but have high impact. That may be something that you want to focus on. So oftentimes what I've done is I've just taken these 2x2 matrices, these effort impact grids, and shared them with stakeholders, so they get an understanding of, this may be a really effective program, but it's really a heavy lift. And so if it's a heavy lift, we might not be able to do it with existing resources, or we may have to share some resources to make it happen. So I'm going to stop there for a second. Aaron, any questions come in?
Yes, I have one. For each of the work-based learning categories, is there an age range or generational type that might be best suited for each one?
I'm sorry, could you read the second half of that question again? I missed that.
For the work-based learning categories, is there an age range or generational type that is best suited for each category?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say not. I would say once you start getting into age ranges, you're probably selling yourself short. Just across the board, you can do all of these programs with different age ranges. Now, obviously, when you're doing career fairs, the places that you host career fairs oftentimes are high schools and community colleges, and so that skews younger. But there's no reason why you couldn't do career fairs in local libraries and things that would get a more representative demographic. So I wouldn't. I'd say that all of these can be across all age ranges. In fact, interestingly enough, there's this whole concept of reverse mentorships, and reverse mentorships are basically where you have a young person mentor an executive at a company, and reverse mentorship is probably not doesn't do it justice. Oftentimes, when you have mentorships between someone with a lot of experience and someone with less experience, you find that the benefits flow both ways, and so oftentimes mentorships and reverse mentorships end up being the same thing. But age range, no, I wouldn't say there's any specific age range. Any other questions, Aaron, or is that it?
Maybe just a follow-up to that one.
Yeah.
Provide maybe a success story you've heard from employers about engaging maybe a high school student in work-based learning rather than a college student or a recent grad.
Yeah, let me get to that. I've got an example I can share. So
thank you.
Good questions. All right. So I'm going to give you a quick example of work-based learning strategies to build external talent pools. And this actually came from a client engagement I had where a client came to me and said, we're just not getting a lot of applicants, and we post these positions and, people just aren't applying. And so the first thing to do is to identify where's the problem. Is there a skill deficit? Or is there an awareness deficit? And you may actually have both of those, but to understand skill deficit or awareness interest deficit, because the solutions you have are going to be very different. So if it's a skill deficit, I think really the way to arrive at this calculation, this is sort of what I did with this client, is I sat down with them and I helped define the skills and capabilities needed for these positions that just weren't getting a lot of interest. The second thing is that we identified existing talent pools, and for this one, they hired mostly out of local community colleges. So we knew what the skills and capabilities needed. We knew where we were looking for employees. Then we worked on determining the skill gaps, and what we did there is we actually started looking at resumes of the people who did apply. Is for the people who do apply, is there a skill deficit, or are we getting a pretty solid group of candidates? Now, obviously, it's harder to find the skill deficit with people who you just don't apply, right? But we figured as a proxy for that, let's just take the employees that come in the pipeline that apply for the program, maybe aren't skilled enough to get those jobs. And then you define the methods for closing the gaps. And the methods for closing the gaps, I'd say for this one, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations are all great approaches. You could also do internships and pre-apprenticeships. Internships, not so much. Usually they're not great at closing skill gaps. Pre-apprenticeships can be pretty darn good. And that's pre-apprenticeship is sort of like an apprenticeship light. But these are the types of things that you can do. In this particular case, for this client, we found out when we did this, there actually wasn't a skill deficit. We found that actually the problem was more an awareness or interest deficit. That for most of the people that applied, they actually had the skills, but they just weren't applying because they weren't aware of things. So, what we did then is we sat down and we articulated what's the employee value proposition. What's the reason why an employee would come to this client and work for this client? The next thing we did is we defined that target audience, and we built out some employee archetypes or profiles. So we tried to identify the types of people we were hiring, and then we determined a bunch of methods to build awareness and interest. And we actually settled on some career exploration programs. We developed career fairs, and we were thinking about industry projects where they could partner with community colleges and have people in various classes do projects with this client of mine. And so, and the goal there isn't really to build skills, because there wasn't really a skill gap. It's really to give them a sense of what it was like working in that industry and working in that company. So I'll give you a few examples of programs to build external talent. So the client that I described didn't have a skill gap, but Lockheed Martin John Deere, and the Wonderful Company are all examples of companies that have apprenticeship programs and educational partnerships that are critical to close skill gaps for people who they end up hiring. So Lockheed Martin has, I think they have around 100 different different apprenticeships they've done. These are registered apprentices. A registered apprenticeship actually provides 4 different things. It's classroom-based training, it's on-the-job experience, it is pay while you're working, and it is an industry recognized credential. And so they've got 100 different job roles and apprenticeships for every single one of them. It's very impressive. John Deere actually has apprenticeship programs for their dealers. For John Deere, the problem was getting enough skilled mechanics to handle the maintenance and repair of their equipment, especially in rural areas. And so what they rolled out is they rolled out an apprenticeship program that they did with local high schools. And so people could actually, while they're in their junior and senior of high school, be enrolled in an apprenticeship. When they graduated from high school, they would take a job working at a John Deere distributor, doing repairs and maintenance. And that was a really critical way of closing a skill gap. So they actually had more people working for their distributors. The Wonderful Company has an educational partnership. The Wonderful Company is in the Central Valley of California, and they're an agricultural company. You probably have seen their pistachios. They have partnerships set up with local high school districts, and it's an ag tech program that, as a high school student, you can participate in it, and it actually sets you through separate classes with a whole bunch of sort of mentorships and job rotations, and you get a sense of what Wonderful is. And when you graduate, you can come work at the Wonderful in an ag tech role. And those are 3 examples that are just, wonderful, wonderful ways of building talent with people who haven't started working for you yet. The type of programs to close the interest or an awareness deficit. This is just a screenshot over here on the right from a job fair in Detroit. Lansing Community College has a bunch of career fairs. These are just great ways of helping build people's interest in coming to work for you. Okay, so that's just an example. I'm going to go on to another example. Erin, any follow-up questions?
No questions. Just
okay.
About that internships and co-ops are definitely amazing ways for employers to identify and train future employees.
Yeah. So internships are great for identifying. That's why they're part of those that bottom rung of programs where it gives people experience and they learn the industry, and it gets you a way of understanding who your prospective talent is. All right, example 2, work-based learning strategies to improve speed to proficiency. And this is another client came to me and said, we're staffing all these frontline roles, and we hire people off of Indeed, and they come work for us. And boy, the speed to proficiency, it takes like 6 months for employees to get up to speed. And so what would you recommend? And so the question to start with is, well, what's getting in the way of faster speed to proficiency? And so, there's sort of different hypotheses. Maybe it's job complexity. It's just the job is really complex. And if that's the case, you could train people. Maybe there's an opportunity to simplify jobs a little bit. And I've seen companies where what they've done is they said the standard job is too complicated, so we're going to separate it out and sort of do a level 1 and a level 2. And level 1 will hire people in. It's simplified, and when they demonstrate proficiency, they can move into level 2. So oftentimes it's poor onboarding programs. And so if you look at the materials, you go, oh, okay, I get the problem. The job isn't too complex. It's just they're really not onboarding people appropriately. In those situations, career experience programs really are your best bet. And these are things like apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations. If really it's job complexity or poor onboarding programs, those are ways that you can close that gap. On the other hand, sometimes it's just unclear hiring guidelines, that there's speed to proficiency because you're getting a bunch of people in who aren't clear about the job and maybe never really wanted the job to start with. Sometimes there's a poor candidate vetting process. They just in the interviews, we're just not interviewing people in a way that allows us to discriminate, sort of high qualified candidates from low qualified candidates. Or maybe there's ineffective coaching and development. Always when you're moving someone through levels of proficiency at a new job, there has to be some degree of coaching and development. Now, if you have unclear hiring guidelines, poor candidate vetting process, ineffective coaching and development, I'd say just don't waste your time by improving the learning programs. Focus on improving talent management and talent acquisition processes. And a lot of that's like, when you when you're advertising a job, be really clear about what the skills and abilities you're looking for and what the job does. Because if you're not clear, people come in, they feel like they've been sold a bill of goods. That's not reflective of the job, and maybe they're frustrated when they leave. They don't have a good experience. So the more direct you can be with potential employees, the better. The better you can have when you have better vetting processes. Oftentimes, teaching all of your hiring managers to interview is an enormously high leverage type of activity. And then ineffective coaching and development, oftentimes really the real problem is that your managers are ineffective coaches, and so you can build that competency. But work-based learning isn't really the tool for that. So I'm going to give you one more example on the job training in the financial services industry. And this is actually from my work at Discover. And I'll give you some background. So I was at Discover for about 15 years, 13, 14, 15 years, somewhere in there. And the background to this is that call center work in most financial services companies requires agents to respond knowledgeably to customer questions across an enormously wide range of complex financial service products. And onboarding programs can be really costly to the company and overwhelming to the learner. So a way to think about this is if you're hiring people into call center jobs and you expect them to fluently answer up to, I think at Discover, we came up with there are probably somewhere between 900 and 1,000 different questions that someone could call and ask about. And to prepare someone to answer all those questions is really, really difficult. And so what we had when I joined the company, we had 6 weeks of classroom training followed by full-time work. So we had them in a classroom and we trained them for 6 weeks, and we did a bunch of role plays, but they didn't know what a headset looked like or how to log into the system or any of that. After 6 weeks, we said, "Good luck, God bless, off you go. Time to work. You get a new manager and they'll strap your headset on and you'll start taking calls." Well, what we found is that employees, when this type of training program, they failed in droves when they went over and started taking calls. There are a couple things going on here. One is there are just too many different types of calls that they had to deal with. And so we tried to train them all to get mixed up in their heads before their first call. And so the first day was rough. And in fact, we also noticed that during that classroom training, there was so much anxiety over actually starting to take calls that we had people who would go through the 6 week of training and they never show up for their first day of real work because they were just too anxious. So we spent a bunch of time thinking about how can we better use on-the-job training and use that to augment our classroom-based training. And what we ended up doing is we ended up having a lot of on-the-job training to pair with classroom training. And the way it worked is that in week 1, we would have 4 days of training, and we trained them how to answer the easiest call. The easiest call was a change of address call. So customers call in, they say, "Hey, I've got a new address." And it's super simple. You just take the information, you hit submit, and you're all done. Say, "Thank you very much," off you go. And so what we did is for 4 days, we trained them on how to do that. And then we had a day where all they did was address changes. And then they came in for week 2. For 4 days, we trained them on the next most complicated call. And then they had a day of work. And then week 3, the same thing, 4 days in the classroom, and then a day taking real live calls. What we found is when we broke it up like this, when they actually went to full-time work, we managed to do it in just 6 weeks. They were much more competent to handle the phone calls, and they are much more confident in the way they handled the phone calls because they had done it before. We also found that we had much lower attrition in our learning program because there wasn't so much anxiety built up. So why don't we just stop right there, and we'll see what other well, actually, let me do one more slide. So before we had poor poor early job performance. We had high attrition. We had low engagement. Afterwards, and these are the objectives that I mentioned at the beginning, for new employees and new hires, we improved their speed to proficiency and we increased the retention rates. And those were two of our big goals. For existing employees, because oftentimes we would actually move employees around and they would have to go through new hire, we found we had better speed to proficiency with transitioning employees when they transition from one job to another, and they had improved employee engagement. That it just wasn't one of these things where we moved them into a new job and they were just enormously scared of starting a new job, and when they did, they didn't succeed. So let's just stop right there and see what questions we have. Aaron, what questions do we have?
So first question is, what is a realistic time frame for getting to proficiency for an employee? The person mentioned that they said that 2 years seems to be what they're seeing as the feeling confident that that person is in their new position.
Yeah, so it really depends on the job role, and it depends on the employee, the sort of the talent that you're hiring from. What I'll tell you is that in a lot of frontline employee jobs, what companies have done is they've de-skilled the job, so reduced the required skills to succeed in a job. And so oftentimes proficiency can be very quickly achieved because the job isn't that complex. And so for many jobs, yeah, I think this is, I've done a lot of work in the warehousing industry, and most companies have really de-skilled warehousing jobs. So basically, you have a picker and a packer and maybe sort of a forklift driver. Pickers and packers are really basic jobs. I mean, you end up going and finding an item in a shelf somewhere and bringing it back and putting it in a box. So you can have high degrees of proficiency right from the very get-go, and then you can use a variety of interventions, work-based learning, to actually develop people into new jobs. One thing that I would say is that if it takes 2 years to establish proficiency, you may want to think about how your jobs are structured, and is there an opportunity to actually have more levels of jobs where people can come in and be proficient within sort of several months as opposed to several years, and then move them as they demonstrate competency, move them into more complex jobs. Aaron, what other questions do we have?
One more. Have you seen employers successfully partner with colleges to award prior learning credit for these types of on-the-job training programs?
Absolutely. So prior learning, that's actually one of the things we did at Discover, where we did an educational partnership with Guild Education to provide free online degrees for our employees. It was really a great thing that we did. And so the way it worked is that on day one of employment, people coming to Discover were qualified to participate in an entirely free online bachelor's degree from one of 3 different universities that were fully regionally accredited, just good universities: University of Florida, University of Wilmington, and Brandman University. And we paid 100% of tuition, all fees and books and any sort of incidentals that were associated with the education program. And we even actually provide a tax gross up if our contributions were over the federal shelter of 5250. We actually provided people a tax gross up. All our employees were eligible on day one, but one of the barriers were that for many of our working adults, they had actually they just looked at that sort of 6 years of going to college part-time to get a degree. My goodness. So what we did is we worked with the universities to get prior learning qualified for credits. So they would actually start with, I think we ended up figuring out a way to get them about 12 credits for our new hire program, and maybe some other programs as well. But we ended up creating a big mapping system where we mapped all of our professional development and job training into our educational partners' prior learning credit awards. And so One thing, that's one of the reasons why it really makes sense if you have a education assistance or a tuition assistance program, it really makes sense creating very specific partnerships with some universities. So because the process of getting prior learning assessments is so complicated, you can't do it with more than one or two universities. And so if you aggregate your spend with a university you think is going to be a great partner for education assistance, then working out that prior learning is a lot easier. Great. Aaron, what other questions do we have?
What are some good ways to measure the return on investment for an employee, and if there are any sample key performance indicators that can be put in place for that new hire?
Okay, so let me make sure I got the question. What's the best way of calculating return on investment for education programs for new employees?
Yes, yeah, that would be like the first part. Yes.
Yeah, so you know, I'd say the way to think about this is you can think about talent management costs and you can think about job performance costs. And so those are sort of two separate things. So talent management costs, what I would say is that includes costs like onboarding a new employee, training a new employee, replacing employee who has left, promoting an employee. Like those are all costly things. Whenever you hire an employee, it's you have a whole marketing and recruitment function, and you interview people. I mean, it's just time consuming, and that costs money. So you can think about learning programs as sort of trying to drive talent management costs down. One of the ways, the biggest way you can do this is reduce attrition. So if you've got a good work-based learning program that manages to reduce attrition, that saves the company money. If you have a work-based learning program that allows you to staff a higher percentage of your more senior jobs with internal candidate, that saves the company money, right? So one of the ways of looking for return on investment is how much does your work-based learning program cost, and what are the reduced talent management costs that you have because you have lower attrition, you've got higher retention rates, you've got maybe lower absenteeism, all the things around just having people on your books. The second cost or benefit of investing in employees is job performance. So job performance usually goes up when you train people, at least that's the theory. The problem is that job performance for most roles is very difficult to quantify. Most companies do a performance management system where they rate employees as, sort of meets expectations, exceeds expectations, does not meet expectations, et cetera. And getting employees to sort of quantify the value of an employee that exceeds expectation over an employee that meets expectations is very difficult. I've done studies where we've looked at, and this is something I did with the Lumina Foundation in Indianapolis. They came in to Discover and did a really cohesive ROI analysis of our education assistance program. And what we found is that on the first half, looking at reduced talent management costs, we could justify all of our spend in education assistance because it dropped talent management costs down so much. We dropped attrition down, we improved promotions, we dropped absenteeism down, all these things that actually benefited the company. And so basically we took, the amount of money we spent on education assistance and matched that against the lower costs that had to do with people who didn't leave the company, had lower attrition, et cetera. We found at Discover, we found that we had 144% ROI just in reduced talent management costs. And so what that meant is that for every dollar that we invested in education assistance, we ended up getting that dollar back plus another $1.44 in offset talent management costs. Now, the other thing you can look at is do people's job performance increase? And we looked at that, and we could find, when we looked at job performance, we could find a lift of somewhere around 5%. Actually, the benefit for the company actually was much more on offset talent management costs than it was in improved job performance. And so that was just something that was interesting to know. If you're interested in that study is posted on the Lumina website, and it's called, I think, talent investments pay off, Discover Financial Services Education Assistance Program, and it gives you a methodology for how you can calculate an ROI. That was a long-winded answer to a relatively short question. Aaron, did I get that whole question?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I have one more.
Yeah.
Colleges are having some trouble when it comes to timing and creating a better alignment for sharing opportunities. An example being students looking for opportunities in the summer when they're done with the school year, but companies hiring in the winter and fall. So there's some difficulty with things matching up, the opportunity and of course, what students are looking for.
Boy, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, you know, one thing I'd say is that if the companies can be more flexible on their job positions, can they start hiring people half-time? You know, you may find that students, part-time employees, you know, it actually works well with student schedules. So can you start hiring part-time employees, then convert them to full-time employees after after a certain period once they graduate? You could also do an apprenticeship or an internship. Those are the type of things that you can get people engaged before they graduate. And so, you know, typically, if actually one of the things, if you have a good tuition reimbursement or education assistance policy, you know, it may make sense for in their senior year for students to actually go part-time at college and part-time at your company, so they can benefit from using your education assistance money to pay for their tuition. But what I would do is I would look at whether or not you can sort of staff a little bit more flexibly rather than have full-time positions and you know and that's it. So what else, Aaron? What other questions do we have?
I think we are all caught up now.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to give you just 4 special pandemic recovery considerations, and these are considerations that, you know, I think the pandemic has changed a lot of the way we do business in HR and in learning. So first of all, with Michigan's unemployment rate now dropping below 4.5%, work-based learning programs are a competitive advantage in the market for scarce talent. So if you're looking for scarce talent, a work-based learning program usually shows up as an enormous advantage when you're trying to hire someone who has many options of where they're going to go work. And so if there is a mentorship program, if there is if there are job rotation programs, these are the type of things that candidates look upon favorably. The second one is the pandemic has really created a crisis for opportunity youth. And these are the exact demographic that disproportionately benefits from work-based learning programs. So to the extent that you're looking to hire people from Black and brown communities who, historically maybe are disadvantaged in the job market, work-based learning programs is one of the ways you can actually build the right skills and the right interest in communities that maybe you have targeted for hiring. And I would say that that if you have any opportunity to create better relationships between you and the communities in which you work, serving opportunity youth through work-based learning programs is really helpful in that regard. During the pandemic, companies, community-based organizations, and educational providers have developed really innovative ways of scaling work-based learning programs. And I think most L&D or training organizations had to change the way they operated. And I think the community-based organizations and training departments and education providers have really leveraged a lot of innovative ways to actually scale these programs. So, if you looked at a work-based learning programs 5 years ago, you may find work-based learning programs are better now. The last one I'd say is that state and federal governments have relaxed many of the standards and requirements for work-based learning programs. So if you're interested in creating a registered apprenticeship program, either at the federal level or at the state level, oftentimes the requirements to get your apprenticeship registered, the requirements have been relaxed during the pandemic. So that's something that's if you're looking for a registered apprenticeship, or you're looking at WOIA money or anything like that, the requirements may be a little lower than you remember. All right, final thoughts and ideas. I'll tell you, the best thing you can do is start by really understanding your objectives. If you don't understand your objectives, the chances are you'll roll out a program that may be awesome, but it's not going to be greeted as awesome by everyone because they may have different objectives for it. Number two, choose a work-based learning strategy that is tailored to your needs. And three, research and copy companies with successful programs. And I've left this to the end. There is great work-based learning programs. When companies launch these, they usually market them quite a bit. And a lot of this is because they want to create a favorable impression with community members. And so oftentimes the best work-based learning programs are far from a secret. You can just you can download a ton of information. You can copy working work-based learning programs. The three that I would say you may want to look into: the educational partnership with a wonderful company that I mentioned. The Lockheed Martin is another one, has great internships or great apprenticeships, and so does John Deere. But if you just use Google, you can find great examples of work-based learning programs. All right, so we have come to the end of the prepared materials. I think Christy has a few final points to make, but I think we've got some extra time here. We've probably got 3 or 4 minutes for additional questions. So what additional questions do we have?
We don't have any additional questions. I know a couple people shared opportunities, so please feel free to skim through the chat if you see any that you'd like to also participate in, or you think that we would be in alignment with what you guys are already doing as well in your own organizations or at your schools.
Awesome. All right, with that, Christy, you are up.
All right, if you, like John said, we've got a couple minutes. So if you think of some last minute questions as I am talking here, please drop those in the chat. We would love to answer your questions. I just want to share a few work-based learning initiatives happening here in the region. This is by no means exhaustive. I'm sure I've missed many of your great programs, so please send me those. But these are just a few folks that we partner with to really provide some good work-based learning opportunities here in Detroit. The first two are really focused on high school youth in the city of Detroit, Urban Alliance and Grow Detroit's Young Talent, and connecting those youth to opportunities with our local employers. So if you're an employer who wants to bring on high school youth, please do reach out. Also, another organization that is not listed here is the partnership that we have with Wayne RISA and the MySTEM network to get students trained in GIS mapping and then place those students into internship opportunities over the summer. Another great program focused on high school youth around a very specific but high demand area. So again, if you're an employer who's looking for some students skilled in GIS mapping and all that entails, please connect with me as well. I'd love to get you with the folks at Wayne RISA. There's also the Detroit New Apprentice Network. Kendra just put some information in the chat about the DNA network, but this is really focused on creating apprenticeship opportunities here in Detroit. This is building on a model that they stood up in Chicago that was just wildly successful, and we're trying to do that here to really get more employers involved in offering apprenticeships and just have a network in place for folks to exchange ideas and best practices and really learn from one another about how we can make Detroit really a hub for apprenticeships as well. And then finally, Year Up is a great organization that works with community colleges and employers to get students trained on skills and competencies that employers are looking for, and then get those students placed into internships while they're in community colleges. We're working very closely with Year Up to get them here in Detroit in a more meaningful way. So a lot of opportunities coming up there as well. And I'm sure, like I said, I know I have not even scratched the surface of what's out there. I see folks dropping other initiatives and resources into the chat. So please reach out so that we can include your work on this list and have it in our back pocket to share with employers who are searching for some opportunities. So John, if you go to the next slide, Just want to reiterate that we are here to help and support you as you develop your work-based learning initiatives. Between myself and my colleague, Erin, we are really excited to build the pipeline here in Detroit and provide more of these opportunities for our students. So we've got our workforce success toolkit that has everything employers need to really develop not only work-based learning experiences, but tuition assistance, create a learning culture, and really just improve and scale your employer-led education initiatives. We can connect you to initiatives that are happening in the region. I listed a few. I know there are more. So we really want to be that convener and make those connections between the great work that is happening. We've got staff on hand who can assist you in every step of the way as you build these programs out. So please, my contact information is here. Don't hesitate to email me. We will send a follow-up email with some of these resources that also includes my contact information. So really just want to continue to talk to you. We hope this is the beginning of a conversation and a partnership. So don't hesitate. We're here to help and support you. And before we wrap up, I saw a lot going on in the chat, so I want to make sure there are no final questions.
Yes. We have another question that came through about remote work options are becoming the new norm. And they mentioned that Johnny talked about proficiency timelines. How does that differ for remote-based employees?
Yeah, so unfortunately, when you shift to a work at home model, a lot of informal sources from learning no longer exist, or they're more difficult to get to. And you think about, like, when you work in an office or a shop floor where you're just around a lot of people, there are a lot of opportunities just to ask questions or to see other people do their work. That is less visible to people working at home oftentimes, and so oftentimes the speed to proficiency takes longer. One of the things that you can do, I mean, I think that companies have really focused on sort of job crafting to make sure the job is designed right to start with, that there are more formal learning experiences that workers can take advantage of, and then finally they try to figure out ways that they can open up the informal, so there are more ways for people to collaborate online. And so what I've seen is companies really leveraging Slack and Teams and these sort of many-to-many messaging systems that creates a persistent chat amongst everyone on the team. And so questions can get escalated very easily to everyone, and everyone can answer, and it creates some camaraderie as well. But I do think that if in your environment people are learning from informal sources, I think that working at home just makes it more difficult because those informal sources are less available when you're isolated in your house.
We have couple more. Do you have any data to support experience-based learning versus work-based learning? They are very similar. Is there any distinct differences between the two?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're going to get caught up in sort of definitional, sort of challenges here. It depends on how you define experience-based learning as opposed to work-based learning. I mean, the way I would define them is, any good learning program should have authentic experiences for people to learn, and the more authentic you can make those experiences, the more they're going to learn. And so, probably experiential learning, there's a continuum, and at one end of the continuum, when you make the experience at 100% authentic, they're actually working, right? Because that's the most authentic you can have is when they're actually doing the job. So I would argue that all your learning should be experiential at some point, and if you can use work-based learning to create really authentic experiences, that's probably the best. But you can grasp the experiences that are pretty authentic in a classroom or in an online environment. We used to do a lot of role playing and sort of pairing up with people, and there are companies that specialize in this to create really authentic online experiences that feel like they're working a job. So that's what I'll say on that.
Awesome. I've got one more, and it looks like we got a partial answer to from someone in the chat, but the question is if you have any suggestions on partnering with maybe educational programs or colleges and universities, I guess, for an employer.
Yeah, I'll tell you from my experience, there are thousands of universities and there's only one of your company. And it's actually really difficult when you're trying to partner across a lot of different universities. I've found that having an intermediary do some of that. Like I had a lot of luck with Guild Education. Bright Horizons has programs like this as well, where basically they'll partner with the academic institutions and you partner with them, and they have a big portfolio of partners that they've worked with, and they've actually sort of run the traps and made sure that those partnerships are going to be effective. So you don't have to spend a lot of your time sort of setting up separate individual partnerships with each university you want to work with.
And we at the Chamber are happy to play that connecting role, utilize us, we can help and support that. And I know we are a minute over time, so I think with that, we will wrap up. It sounds like there's a lot of interest in this topic, so we will absolutely continue to convene around this area. And just looking forward to working with all of you to connect these dots and make sure we're all talking to one another and sharing resources. So thank you, as always, John, for a wonderful discussion. We will follow up with resources and a survey, so please don't hesitate to reach out with further questions or to learn more. So expect to hear from us with follow-up soon, and thank you all for your time this morning. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.